Welcome back, listeners. Today we're taking a deep dive into the reading habits of a literary giant, Vladimir Nabokov.
You know, he's often remembered for Lolita, but
Uh,
his literary world expands
Way beyond that, yeah.
so much further. And that's precisely what we're going to uncover today. We'll be using some excerpts from Reading the Nabokovian, and we'll also
Nice.
delve into some of his most thought-provoking quotes from Vladimir Nabokov quotes, brainy quote.
I love that, using his own words to kind of illuminate.
Exactly,
Yeah.
to understand his perspective.
So everyone knows Nabokov, the butterfly guy, right?
Yeah.
But did you know his reading was just as diverse?
It's amazing, isn't it?
So we're going to unearth some unexpected authors and genres he just devoured. I can't wait.
It challenges the image of the stereotypical, brooding novelist, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
He was a voracious reader, surprisingly diverse appetite.
Yeah, let's dig into that. So first up, Sasha Czorny, a Russian poet and humorist.
And a close friend of Nabokov's father.
Oh, wow.
Nabokov actually credits Czorny with helping him arrange his first collection of poems.
That's incredible. He has this quote where he says he always found a small animal in the corner of Czorny's poems. It's like a little hidden signature.
Isn't that beautiful?
I love that. It's so evocative. And it's interesting because, Nabokov himself
Yes.
was known for, his playful use of animal imagery.
Absolutely. Weaving it into his narratives, often in unexpected ways.
Totally. It's like he absorbed it from Czorny early on.
Oh.
Okay, ready for another surprise?
Hit me.
Nabokov also had a thing for Christiane Rochefort, a French feminist novelist.
Interesting.
He even called her novel, Warrior's Rest, sheer pleasure. Now, that's not exactly an author you typically associate with Nabokov, right?
It really challenges that perception of him as, out of touch with contemporary social movements. It shows he was engaged in a variety of perspectives.
Yeah. Even those that maybe challenge the status quo. I mean, it makes you wonder how these, seemingly disparate interests might have informed his own work, right? His own complex, often controversial work.
Exactly.
Because, he famously said, all novelists of any worth are psychological novelists.
And he lived by those words.
Right. And that fascination with the inner workings of the mind,
It's palpable in his writing.
it led him to psychology, right?
Absolutely. Well, he was introduced to William James
Oh, wow.
at a very young age, by his father, no less, sparked a lifelong interest. He was also drawn to Cesare Lombroso,
Oh, wow.
more on the criminology side.
So, the darker aspects of human nature.
Precisely.
Okay, so here's where things get a little tricky.
Yeah.
We know he claimed to dislike detective novels, but come on, his work is packed with Sherlock Holmes references.
So many illusions.
And he even recommended specific detective novels to his friend, Edmund Wilson.
Fascinating.
Right. He even said that teaching literature was like a detective investigation of literary structures.
He couldn't resist the allure of a good mystery.
It seems that way. It highlights this, complexity of his literary tastes and how he found inspiration in unexpected places.
And also his own intricate plotting, the mechanics of storytelling,
Think about Pale Fire.
keeping the reader guessing.
Oh, a master. And speaking of literary relationships, we can't forget his friendship, or shall I say, friendship turned feud with Edmund Wilson.
Right. Years of friendship and intellectual exchange.
I know. Like titans clashing.
But their relationship soured, clashing opinions on literature, and maybe some ego on both sides.
It's a classic tale of admiration turning into rivalry. It's almost like Shakespearean.
Right.
They even disagreed about Robert Louis Stevenson.
Can you imagine?
Nabokov thought Jekyll and Hyde was Stevenson's only good work.
Interesting.
While Wilson, he had a much higher opinion of, Stevenson's whole body of work.
Showing how even brilliant minds can have such different perspectives.
Yeah, it shows how subjective literary taste can be.
What one considers a masterpiece, another might find mediocre.
Absolutely. And you know what? Nabokov's reading wasn't limited to just, books. He was a fan of comics, too.
That's right.
He even referenced those gollywog illustrations.
From Florence Kate Upton
Yeah.
in his later novel, Transparent Things.
That's amazing.
Such a delightful connection.
I love those little details.
Shows his playful side.
Okay, let's talk about some of his more, let's call them spicy opinions.
Oh, yes.
He really disliked certain types of writing, particularly pornography. Called it a copulation of cliches, which is quite a zinger.
He didn't hold back.
Not at all. And he wasn't much kinder to socialist realism. Now, for those who are familiar, it was essentially propaganda disguised as art, meant to promote the ideals of the communist regime.
Right, often depicting this very idealized version of Soviet life.
And Nabokov, with his independent spirit, dedication to artistic freedom.
He completely rejected this.
Totally. Saw it as limiting, formulaic.
Incapable of capturing the real complexities of human experience.
Which is why he championed writers like Abram Tertz, who really challenged those restrictions.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to something a little more poetic. Nabokov once said that reading great poetry gave him, get this, a spinal twinge.
Wow. What a description.
He mentioned Richard Wilbur's Complaint as an example. What do you make of that?
It speaks to his deep sensitivity to language, the power of poetry.
Yeah, like to evoke this visceral response.
He wasn't just reading for information.
Wow.
This was an emotional and aesthetic experience.
Almost like experiencing the poem on a physical level.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And this brings us to a crucial point. Nabokov's reading wasn't passive. It was fuel for his own creative fire.
It was an active process of absorbing ideas.
Yeah. Styles, even specific images.
To create something new, something uniquely Nabokovian.
He was a true master of,
synthesis.
It makes you wonder how a mind that could embrace, the whimsy of Sasha Czorny and the psychological depth of William James, how could that same mind create something as complex and, let's be honest, controversial as Lolita?
That's the magic of Nabokov. His reading was like this tapestry
I like that.
of seemingly disparate threads all woven together.
That's beautiful.
To create this rich and fascinating body of work.
And we've only scratched the surface.
We have so much more to uncover. It's really striking, when you look at the range of his reading.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, the classics. He wasn't afraid to explore anything, like detective novels, feminist literature, even scientific works. Like the concept of time.
Wow.
Makes you rethink that image of the the typical highbrow novelist.
Totally like stuck in their ivory tower.
Exactly.
And it wasn't just about reading widely. It was about reading deeply, like really engaging with these authors.
Oh, yeah, dissecting their ideas, making these surprising connections.
Yes. And remember how he connected the poetry of Rupert Brooke?
Yes.
To the idea of the hereafter?
Not your typical literary analysis.
No, not at all.
He had this knack for finding those hidden layers of meaning.
Yeah, and seeing patterns that others just completely missed.
Really makes you think about our own reading habits,
Oh, for sure.
Do we get stuck in a rut?
I know, I do something.
Reading the same, genres over and over?
Yeah.
Maybe it's time to, take a cue from Nabokov.
Be a little more adventurous.
Venture outside our comfort zones.
I think that is such a great takeaway from this deep dive.
It is.
Nabokov reminds us there's always something new to discover.
Yes.
And that stepping outside of what we're used to can lead to these unexpected insights.
Inspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just about, finding new authors. It's about how we engage with the material.
Yes. Thinking critically.
Questioning assumptions.
Making those connections.
Yeah, like it becomes a conversation.
It's a dialogue.
With the author.
With ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And Nabokov, he really exemplified that.
He did.
Both in his life and his work.
In his writing.
But there's another layer to this we need to talk about.
Okay, what's that?
Okay, we've talked about the diversity, the depth of his reading, but what about the contradictions?
Ah, yes, the contradictions.
He had such strong opinions about literature.
He did.
Yet his own tastes were so eclectic.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
So on the one hand, we have Nabokov, the literary snob, right? Dismissing entire genres like, detective fiction.
Ethnography.
Yeah, he had very specific ideas about what constituted good literature.
He didn't hold back either. Remember that quote about pornography?
Oh, yeah.
A copulation of cliches?
Ouch.
Pretty harsh.
Yeah, and yet we find him reading and enjoying authors who wouldn't necessarily fit his own definition of literary excellence.
Right, like Sasha Czorny.
Yes, the whimsical verse of Sasha Czorny.
Or Rochefort.
The feminist prose of Christiane Rochefort.
Even certain detective novels.
It's almost like he had this secret rebellious streak.
Maybe a willingness to indulge in guilty pleasures.
Right. Or maybe it suggests that Nabokov, despite his strong opinions, was ultimately driven by a pure love of language.
Storytelling.
The sheer joy of reading. He wasn't afraid to follow his curiosity.
Wherever it led.
Even if it meant reading something that he might publicly dismiss.
I think that's a really insightful point.
Yeah.
It shows the complexity of his character.
Yeah.
The idea that even someone as brilliant as Nabokov had those contradictions.
I think we could all relate to that.
Absolutely.
Right? We all have, internal contradictions and guilty pleasures.
Evolving tastes.
Yeah, it's part of being human.
Exactly. So how do we reconcile these seemingly rigid opinions
Yeah.
with his diverse reading habits?
It's a great question. Maybe it's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds,
Are capable of holding those contradictory views.
or maybe it suggests that he was more open-minded than he let on.
Or maybe it's a challenge to us as readers.
Ooh, I like that.
To be open to those contradictions.
Yeah.
Embrace them, explore, experiment. You never know what you might discover.
That's what I love about these deep dives.
Me too.
It's not about finding a definitive answer. It's about asking the questions,
Sparking curiosity.
engaging with the material.
In our own way.
Yes, exactly. Okay, now let's talk about some of the specific authors and works that he really championed.
Okay.
He had a soft spot for certain writers, even if they weren't widely recognized.
Like who?
Take Walter de la Mare,
Okay.
a British poet known for his kind of ethereal imagery.
Interesting.
Nabokov was drawn to his use of rhythm and sound.
Interesting.
And it's interesting because de la Mare's style was considered a bit old-fashioned.
Even in his own time.
But Nabokov saw beyond that.
He recognized the artistry.
Yeah, he had this ability to appreciate works that were outside the mainstream.
Finding value where others might not.
Reminds us that literary tastes are subjective.
Absolutely.
What one person finds brilliant, another might dismiss as, irrelevant or outdated.
So important to be open to different styles.
Different perspectives.
You never know what might resonate with you.
If you're willing to give it a chance.
Exactly. And speaking of underappreciated authors,
Okay, who else?
Nabokov was also a fan of Henry Fitzgerald Hurd.
Okay, I've never heard of him.
Hurd was a British writer who explored all sorts of topics,
Like what?
from science commentary to detective fiction.
Really?
He even wrote a novel featuring Sherlock Holmes' elder brother, Mycroft.
Wow, so he couldn't resist a good mystery, even if it came from a writer who wasn't considered, highbrow.
He enjoyed a good story.
It goes back to that idea that even someone as discerning as Nabokov,
He was drawn to good storytelling,
no matter what.
no matter the genre, the author's reputation.
So it makes you wonder, what hidden gems are we missing out on
Right.
by focusing only on the big names?
The critically acclaimed authors.
Right. Maybe it's time to take a chance on some of those lesser-known writers.
And see what treasures we can unearth.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, let's shift gears for a second and talk about his views on some of the major issues of his time.
Right.
Because he was a firm critic of totalitarianism.
Oh, yes. Both in its communist and fascist forms.
And his reading reflected that stance.
It did.
He was drawn to authors like Alexander Herzen.
A 19th century Russian writer.
Yeah, who advocated for liberal values, individual freedom.
And those writings resonated with Nabokov's own beliefs about individual liberty.
He also read and admired the works of Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Whose accounts of life in the Soviet gulags really exposed the brutality of the regime.
Interestingly, though, Nabokov didn't shy away from criticizing Solzhenitsyn's writing style.
Oh, really?
Calling it somewhat journalistic.
Mm-hmm.
But even though he had reservations about the style, he still recognized the importance of Solzhenitsyn's work.
As a historical document,
Yeah.
testament to the human cost of oppression.
It shows Nabokov's ability to separate his aesthetic judgment
from his moral and political convictions.
He could appreciate the value of a work, even if he wasn't totally in love with the style.
And it reminds us that literature can be such a powerful tool
Oh, yeah.
for social commentary, for political activism.
Absolutely. Books can challenge our assumptions, expose injustice.
Inspire us to work towards a better world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
The diversity, the depth,
The contradiction.
the political dimensions of his reading.
Lots to unpack.
But there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we still need to examine.
And what's that?
The impact of all this reading on his own writing.
Ah, yes.
How did these diverse influences shape his unique style?
And vision.
That's what we'll explore in our final segment. Right, so we've established that Nabokov was a serious bookworm, right?
Oh, yeah.
Devouring everything from, literary masterpieces to those like pulpy mysteries.
Full spectrum.
But the big question is, how did all that reading, how did it influence his own writing?
Right. How did he take all those different styles, those ideas, and make them his own?
Yeah, that's the real magic trick.
It's fascinating because he wasn't just, passively absorbing all this information.
Right.
He was actively synthesizing it.
Okay.
Taking elements from his favorite authors, reworking them,
Yeah.
and ultimately transforming them into something completely new.
It's like he was some kind of literary alchemist.
Precisely.
Like turning base metals into gold.
A master of illusion and pastiche.
Okay.
weaving in those references to other works.
Often in subtle and surprising ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Like take Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
A story Nabokov deeply admired.
You can't help but see those echoes
Right.
in his own work.
That surreal and psychologically charged narrative.
Yet he was adamant that he wasn't directly influenced by Kafka.
In fact, he even said in the foreword to Invitation to a Beheading
Okay.
that there were no stylistic links between his work and The Trial or The Castle.
So was he being sincere or was he just messing with us?
It's hard to say for certain.
Right.
But I think it speaks to this desire to be seen as an original,
Right.
not a derivative writer.
He absorbed those influences.
Absolutely. But he always transcended them.
Creating something totally unique.
Totally new.
But let's be real, there are some pretty noticeable fingerprints
Oh, yeah.
of other authors on his work. You can't deny the influence of Lewis Carroll.
It's that love of wordplay.
The puns.
Absolutely.
And his fascination with memory.
The subjective nature of time.
That's got to have some connection to Proust.
It has to.
And the way he uses those vivid images, sensory details.
Right, creating these immersive worlds.
I can't help but think that comes from his love of, 19th century Russian literature.
It makes sense.
So he was undoubtedly a product of all these influences, but
But a master of transformation.
yeah, he took what resonated with him, what sparked his imagination.
And turned it into something uniquely Nabokovian,
It's like he was sampling from different genres and eras.
creating a kind of literary mixtape,
Ooh, I love that. A literary mixtape.
both familiar and utterly strange.
Okay, so we've talked about how all this reading shapes his style, but what about his themes? Right. Did his reading influence the actual ideas he explored?
Yeah, because his interest in psychology.
That's everywhere in his work.
Right, he was fascinated by the intricacies of the human mind,
Those darker impulses.
the blurred lines between sanity and madness.
Think of characters like Humbert from Lolita.
Or Kinboat in Pale Fire.
Unreliable narrators. Their perceptions totally skewed by their own obsessions.
Yeah, and it's not just individual psychology either. He was also interested in those, broader social and political forces.
Right, shaping our lives.
And his readings of, Herzen Solzhenitsyn.
They definitely informed his critique of totalitarianism.
Yeah.
That belief in individual freedom.
And the power of, artistic expression.
Absolutely.
And of course, we can't forget about the butterfly motif,
Always present.
right? That wasn't just a personal hobby for him.
It was a metaphor for transformation.
The beauty that can be found.
In those small details.
So for Nabokov, reading wasn't just a source of, information or entertainment.
It was a way of engaging with the world.
Wrestling with those big ideas, searching for meaning.
Searching for beauty.
It's a good reminder that, reading isn't just a solitary thing.
It's a way of connecting with other minds.
Across time and space.
Through those books, we're engaging in a conversation
With the authors.
with all the readers who came before us.
That's such a beautiful way to think about it.
It is, isn't it?
It makes me want to go out and read all the books that Nabokov loved, just to kind of see the world through his eyes
Trace those threads of influence.
that connect us all.
I love exploring the reading habits of these great writers.
You too.
It gives us a window into their creative process.
Yeah, a glimpse of what inspired them.
It encourages us to be more adventurous in our own reading.
Expand our horizons.
Seek out new voices, new perspectives.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the reading life of Vladimir Nabokov,
It's been a journey.
it has. I'm left with this question for you.
Okay, shoot.
Considering the incredible breadth and depth of his literary tastes,
It's pretty amazing.
how can we reconcile those seemingly rigid opinions
Right.
with his own eclectic interests? What does that tell us about him as a reader?
And as a writer,
That is a great question to ponder.
it is.
It's almost as if he was challenging us to think critically about our own reading habits,
To be open to new experiences.
to never stop exploring.
Well said. Until next time, happy reading.